The orbital station above 4 was always busy. Ships came and went at all hours. Aliens of every shape and size walked through its wide corridors. Some had scales, some had fur, some looked like nothing had ever seen before. But they all had one thing in common. They all thought they were better than him. Stood at the back of the great assembly hall, trying not to draw attention to himself. He was the only human on the station, the only human who had ever been invited to the Galactic Construction Consortium. He was 53 years old, with gray hair cut short and hands that showed decades of hard work. His skin was weathered from years spent building on the moon, where the radiation aged you fast and the work aged you faster. The hall was filled with representatives from a dozen species. They stood near the front, their bodies made of something like living crystal. They caught the light and scattered it into rainbows whenever they moved. They built with anti-gravity fields and energy manipulation. Their structures floated in the air, held together by forces that human science barely understood. Next to them were the creatures that looked like giant insects with too many legs. They didn't use tools at all. Their bodies produced a natural polymer that hardened into building material stronger than steel. They simply walked across a construction site and left structures behind them like spiders leaving webs. The wren were harder to look at. They were a hive species, thousands of small drone creatures controlled by a central mind. They moved like a living cloud, each tiny body carrying a piece of material to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. They could build a tower in hours without ever making a single mistake. Had only a toolbox. The consortium's leader, unnamed, stepped onto the raised platform at the front of the hall. Her crystalline body chimed softly as she moved, like wind through glass bells. "We have an emergency contract," she announced. Her voice was translated by the small device in his ear, turning alien sounds into words he could understand. The southern continent of 4 requires a habitation complex, standard housing for 500 colonists. The deadline is 30 rotations. A murmur went through the crowd. Didn't understand why at first. 30 days seemed like a reasonable timeline for housing construction, then continued. As you know, the southern continent presents unique challenges. Seismic instability has been measured at level 7. Atmospheric acidity exceeds tolerance for most building materials, and the old mining operations have created gravitational anomalies that can increase local gravity by 300% without warning. Now understood the murmur. Those weren't construction challenges, those were death sentences. "The colony ship arrives in 31 rotations," continued. "They cannot be redirected. They have nowhere else to go. We need a contractor willing to accept this project." Silence filled the hall. The representatives exchanged glances but said nothing. Their crystalline structures were beautiful, but they shattered under stress. Earthquakes and gravity spikes would destroy anything they built. They shifted on their many legs. Their polymer materials were strong, but the acidic atmosphere would dissolve them within days. They couldn't even safely visit the construction site. The Wren Collective hummed quietly. Their drones were efficient but fragile. A single gravity anomaly could crush hundreds of them at once. The cost in lives would be too high. No one spoke. Raised his hand. Every alien in the room turned to look at him. He felt very small standing there in his plain gray jumpsuit, surrounded by creatures that could reshape matter with their minds or build with their own bodies. "I'll take the contract," he said. For a moment nothing happened, then made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. All around the hall, other aliens joined in. They chimed and sparkled. They clicked their mandibles together. Even the Wren Collective buzzed in a way that suggested amusement. "The human believes it can succeed where we cannot," said. She waved one crystalline limb, and holographic images appeared in the air above the platform. They showed human construction sites, steel beams being welded together, concrete being poured into wooden forms, workers in hard hats carrying materials by hand. Observe their methods, said. They cut metal into pieces and then stick the pieces back together. They mix powder with water and wait for it to harden. They carry objects from one place to another using only their muscle strength. More laughter echoed through the hall. A representative stepped forward. They require external tools for every task. They cannot even produce their own building materials. They must dig rocks from the ground and process them through machines. Their coordination is equally primitive, the Wren Collective added, speaking through dozens of tiny mouths at once. They build one piece at a time, sequentially, like animals stacking stones. Stood quietly through all of it. He had heard worse. On the moon, he had worked with crews that thought he was too old, too slow, too stubborn. He had proven them wrong with every dome he built, every tunnel he dug, every structure he finished ahead of schedule. If the human wishes to attempt the project, we should allow it, said. The laughter in her voice was barely hidden. It will provide an educational record for our archives. Future species seeking membership can see what happens when primitives overestimate their abilities. She looked directly at, do you accept the contract under standard terms? No assistance from other species. No advanced technology. Only your own primitive methods. I accept, said. What resources do you require? Had already made his list. I need earth-moving equipment, welding rigs, 200 tons of cement, steel rebar, standard hand tools, safety equipment for one worker. One worker. His crystalline face couldn't show expression, but her voice carried confusion. You will attempt this alone. I work better alone. This brought fresh laughter from the assembly. The idea of a single human completing a project that entire alien teams had refused was apparently the funniest thing they had heard in years. Very well, said. Your equipment will be delivered to the surface. The observation drones will document your progress. We look forward to reviewing the results. The meeting ended. Aliens filed out of the hall, most of them still making sounds of amusement. A few gave looks that might have been pity. None of them offered help or encouragement. Returned to his small quarters on the station and began his final preparations. He reviewed the geological surveys of the southern continent. He studied the atmospheric composition and the patterns of acid storms. He memorized the locations of known gravitational anomalies and calculated where new ones might appear based on the old mining tunnels. When he was satisfied, he packed a single bag with personal items, a photograph of his daughter, now grown with children of her own, a worn paperback book his father had given him decades ago, a small rock from the first lunar dome he had helped build, carried as a good luck charm ever since. The next morning, he boarded the cargo shuttle that would take him to the surface. The shuttle's hold was filled with his equipment. Bags of cement were stacked against the walls. Steel rebar was bundled in neat piles. His earth mover was secured to the deck, a machine that looked ancient compared to the alien technology around it. As the shuttle descended through the atmosphere of 4, watched the planet grow larger through the small window. The southern continent was visible as a dark mass of land surrounded by gray-green oceans. Even from orbit, he could see the scars of old mining operations and the strange shimmer of gravitational distortion near the abandoned sites. The shuttle landed hard. The ground here wasn't stable enough for gentle approaches. Felt the impact through his seat and heard the cement bags shift against their restraints. He opened the shuttle door and stepped out onto the surface of 4. The air hit him first. His suit's filters kept out the worst of the acidity, but he could still smell something sharp and chemical. The ground beneath his boots was gray and rocky, with patches of mud that hadn't fully dried since the last rainfall. In the distance, mountains rose against a yellow sky. The shuttle pilot, a 4-armed creature whose species didn't recognize, handed him a communication device. "Emergency beacon," the pilot said. "When you want to be rescued, press the button." "I won't need it," said. The pilot made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. Every species says that. Most of them press the button within 10 rotations. Some of them press it within 1. Tucked the beacon into his pocket. Thanks for the ride. The shuttle lifted off, leaving him alone on the surface. He watched it disappear into the yellow sky, then turned to look at his equipment. The earth mover, the cement, the steel, everything he needed to build a home for 500 people on a planet that seemed determined to kill anyone who tried. Above him, barely visible against the daylight, observation drones circled like patient vultures. The aliens were watching. They expected him to fail. They expected him to press that emergency beacon and beg for rescue. Smiled to himself and walked toward the earth mover. He had 30 days to prove them wrong. The ground trembled slightly beneath his feet. In the distance, lightning flickered inside a cloud that looked darker and more dangerous than any storm on Earth. He climbed into the earth mover's seat and started the engine. It was time to get to work. The first earthquake hit on day 3. Was digging the foundation trenches when the ground started to shake. It wasn't a gentle vibration. The whole world seemed to twist sideways. His earth mover tipped dangerously, and he grabbed the controls to keep it from rolling over. Rocks tumbled down from a nearby hillside. The trench he had just finished digging cracked and shifted, the walls threatening to collapse. Then it stopped. The silence that followed felt almost holy. Climbed out of the earth mover and inspected the damage. The trench was ruined. 3 days of work destroyed in 30 seconds. Any other builder might have been discouraged. Any other builder might have started to understand why the alien species had refused this contract. Just walked back to his equipment pile and started calculating how much extra cement he would need. On the orbital station above, observation footage was being reviewed by interested parties. Watched the human climbing out of his primitive machine, covered in dust and mud, and felt something like admiration for his stubbornness. It was a foolish kind of stubbornness, the kind that would get him killed, but it was impressive nonetheless. He's restarting the dig, her assistant noted. Same location. He'll learn, said. That ground is fundamentally unstable. No foundation can hold there. But the human didn't restart the dig in the same way. Watched with growing curiosity as he modified his approach. Instead of digging straight trenches, he began carving curved shapes into the earth. Instead of flat-bottomed foundations, he created undulating surfaces that dipped and rose like waves frozen in stone. What is he doing? Her assistant asked. Didn't have an answer. On the surface, was building something that his father had taught him about 30 years ago. His father had worked construction in earthquake zones on Earth. He had learned that rigid structures broke and flexible structures survived. Wasn't trying to fight the planet's instability. He was designing foundations that could move with it. The curved trenches would allow his foundation to flex during earthquakes instead of cracking. The undulating bottom would distribute stress across a wider area instead of concentrating it at weak points. It wasn't the most elegant solution. It used more cement than a standard foundation. It required more time to dig. But it would survive. Day 5 brought the first acid storm. Saw it coming hours in advance. The yellow sky turned greenish-brown, and the air started to smell even sharper than usual. He secured his equipment under protective covers and retreated to the small shelter he had built from scrap materials and reinforced plastic sheeting. The rain that fell was not like any rain on Earth. It hissed when it hit the ground. It left streaks on metal surfaces that would eventually become holes if not treated. It dissolved organic materials in minutes. But it did something else too. Something that had noticed when reviewing the atmospheric data back on the station. The acid rain reacted with certain mineral compounds to create an extremely hard crystalline layer. It was the same process that had created the region's rocky landscape over millions of years. The planet was essentially coating itself in protective armor. watched the rain falling on his freshly poured concrete and smiled. He had modified his cement mixture with local minerals. Instead of dissolving his work, the acid rain was strengthening it. Every storm would make his foundation harder. Every rainfall would add another layer of protection. On the station, the specialists were the first to notice what was happening. "The human has weaponized the acid rain," one of them reported too. "His building materials are actually improving under conditions that would destroy our polymer structures." Reviewed the data herself. The concrete compound was showing increased hardness after each storm exposure. The crystalline layer forming on its surface was nearly as strong as this own building secretions. "How did he know to do this?" she asked. "Unknown. Human construction records show no previous experience with acidic atmospheres. He must have developed the technique himself." Felt the first small seed of unease take root in her mind. By day 10, the foundations were complete. Had worked through 2 more earthquakes and 3 more acid storms. He had slept an average of 5 hours per night, eaten ration packs that he barely tasted, and lost 8 pounds that he couldn't afford to lose. But the foundations were solid, they were tested, they were ready. He began raising the walls. This was the part that the alien observers found most disturbing. They watched the human carry steel beams on his shoulders. They watched him climb scaffolding that he had built by hand, welding joints together one at a time. They watched him work in conditions that would have killed any of them within hours. A REN analyst calculated that individual output equaled what their 20 drone construction teams could produce. This should have been impossible. One human could not match 20 specialized building units. The math didn't work. But the human kept building. On day 15, the gravitational anomaly hit. Was welding a joint on the 3rd floor framework when the world suddenly became much heavier. His knees buckled. The welding torch felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Every breath required conscious effort, like trying to inflate his lungs against a crushing weight. The observation drones recorded the incident with clinical precision. Local gravity had increased by 270%. The anomaly was centered directly on the construction site. Any in that zone would have shattered. Any would have been crushed flat. Any REN drone would have been pressed into the ground like an insect under a boot. The human shifted his stance. His legs spread wider, his center of gravity lowered, and he kept welding. On the station, watched this footage in private. She replayed it several times, trying to understand what she was seeing. The human's body was clearly struggling. Sweat poured down his face. His movements were slow and labored, but he didn't stop. He didn't even pause. When the anomaly passed 8 minutes later, he simply straightened up, rolled his shoulders, and continued working as if nothing had happened. Opened a historical database and began researching human construction methods. She found records of cathedrals that had taken over 100 years to complete, built by workers who knew they would die before seeing the finished structure. She found images of humans building railroads through mountain ranges, drilling through solid rock with hand tools and explosives. She found footage of a construction accident where a human worker fell 3 stories and broke both his legs. Instead of waiting for medical help, he had directed the rest of the project from a stretcher, refusing to leave the site until his crew finished the day's work. She did not sleep that night. Day 20 brought the worst storm yet. The weather systems of 4 seemed to be gathering their strength for one final assault on the human who dared to build on their territory. The clouds that formed over the southern continent were darker than anything in the recorded history of the colony surveys. The observation drones failed within the first hour of the storm. Their electronics couldn't handle the combination of acid rain, electromagnetic interference, and debris impacts. One by one, their feeds went dark. On the station, the consortium assumed the worst. No one said it out loud, but everyone believed that the human was dead. The storm was a Category 7. It would have destroyed anything that the alien species could have built. There was no way primitive human construction could survive it. The storm lasted 3 rotations. When it finally cleared, the consortium sent new observation drones to document the wreckage. The structure was still standing. More than standing. It was nearly complete. The exterior walls were finished. The roof was in place. The human had used the storm itself as part of his construction process. The acid bombardment had cured his final concrete layers to a hardness that exceeded all projections. The wind had tested every joint and connection, and they had held. Was on the roof, measuring for solar panel installation when the new drones arrived. He looked up at them, waved once and went back to work. On the station, gathered the representatives of every species for an emergency meeting. Something had changed. The human who had been a joke was now something else entirely. No one was laughing anymore. The habitation complex was finished with 2 rotations to spare. Stood at the main entrance of the building he had created, watching the inspection team's shuttle descend from orbit. His hands were raw. His body was exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. He had lost 15 pounds since arriving on the surface, and his skin had taken on a grayish tone from weeks of exposure to the acidic atmosphere. But the building behind him was solid. It was real. It would stand. The shuttle landed, and a delegation of aliens emerged. Led them, her crystalline body catching the weak sunlight and scattering it into pale rainbows. Behind her came representatives from the Wren Collective and 6 other species that didn't recognize. They had come expecting to find minimum work. A building that technically met the contract requirements but was crude, ugly, and barely functional. Something they could point to and say, yes, the human completed the project, but look at the quality of his primitive methods. Instead, they found something else entirely. The structure was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean lines, solid walls, windows that were positioned to catch the maximum light while minimizing exposure to acid rain, a roof designed to collect and filter rainwater for the colonists' use. Everything was functional. Everything made sense. But more than that, everything was built to last. Ran her scanners over the foundation. The concrete had bonded with the local minerals to create a compound stronger than anything in the consortium's material database. The flexibility built into the base would allow it to survive earthquakes that would topple crystal towers or polymer domes. The walls were reinforced in ways that seemed excessive until you remembered the gravitational anomalies. Humans had apparently learned, through generations of experience, to build stronger than necessary, to account for disasters that hadn't happened yet. The specialist examined the joints and connections. Every weld was clean. Every bolt was properly torqued. There were no shortcuts, no weak points hidden behind pretty surfaces. The human had done the work correctly even when no one was watching. This exceeds contract specifications, said finally. Her voice was quiet and her translator couldn't quite capture the emotion behind it, by a significant margin. Shrugged, people are going to live here. I wanted to make sure they'd be safe. You nearly died completing this project. I've nearly died completing a lot of projects. That's construction. Wanted to understand. She had spent the past 20 rotations studying human history, trying to find the explanation for what this single human had accomplished. She had learned about their wars, their disasters, their countless failures. She had learned that humans built cities in deserts and towers in swamps and homes on the sides of active volcanoes. Why do you build the way you do? She asked. Your species has no natural advantages. No anti-gravity manipulation, no biological construction materials, no hive coordination. You have only your weak bodies and your simple tools. Why do you persist? Looked at her for a long moment, then he held up his hands. They were the hands of a working man. The skin was thick with calluses. Scars crossed the palms and fingers in dozens of places. 2 fingers on his left hand were crooked, broken years ago and healed wrong because he couldn't afford to stop working long enough for proper treatment. My great-grandfather helped build the first lunar dome, said. He was one of the first human construction workers in space. He used to tell my grandmother that the moon was trying to kill him every single day. The radiation, the vacuum, the dust that got into everything. 3 men died on his crew during that project. He nearly died twice himself. Listened in silence. But he kept building, because the dome wasn't for him. It was for the people who would come after, the families who would live there, the children who would be born there. He never saw any of that. He died before the dome was fully pressurized, but he knew it would happen. He knew that his work would outlast him. Looked back at the building he had constructed. 500 colonists would live here. They would raise families, build communities, create lives for themselves on a world that had tried its best to remain empty. We don't build because we have advantages, said. We build because someone has to, and we decided a long time ago that it would be us. We build despite everything, despite earthquakes and storms and wars and gravity and our own bodies giving out. We build because that's what humans do. Didn't respond immediately. She was processing something that her species had never really understood about humans. They didn't build because it was easy or because they were good at it. They built because they refused to accept that anything was impossible. They built through sheer stubborn persistence, through pain and exhaustion and death, generation after generation. There's something else, added. He gestured toward the building. Everything I built here, the colonists can maintain themselves. The techniques I use don't require specialized biology or advanced technology. Anyone can learn them. Any human can look at this structure and understand how it was made and how to fix it if something breaks. This was the part that truly frightened. She understood it now. Human construction was not just persistent. It was self-replicating. Every human colony could teach the next generation. Every building could serve as a template for more buildings. The knowledge spread not through expensive training programs or rare genetic abilities, but through simple observation and practice. A could only teach another. A could only build with its own body. A Wren collective required a central mind to coordinate. But a human could teach anyone. The inspection was completed without further comment. Every measurement exceeded requirements. Every system functioned properly. The contract was fulfilled. As the delegation prepared to leave, pulled aside. The consortium will vote to grant humans full membership, she said. You've earned it. Thank you. It is not a gift, it is. She paused, searching for words. It is recognition of something we failed to understand. Nodded slowly. He seemed to know what she was struggling to say. The other species will watch your progress carefully from now on, continued. They will track your expansion, your construction projects, your colonization efforts. Some of them are already concerned about what your membership might mean. Concerned why? His crystalline body chimed softly in what might have been a sigh. Because we have made calculations. The Wren are very good at projections. They estimate that if humans continue building at your current rate, using your primitive but effective methods, your species could outbuild every other consortium member within 300 years. Seemed surprised by this. We're just doing what we've always done. Yes, that is precisely what concerns us. Turn to look at the habitation complex one more time. We laughed at you. We called your methods primitive. We thought your persistence was foolishness. She turned back to face him. We were wrong. Your methods are not primitive. They are fundamental. They work with any materials in any conditions taught to any willing student. Your persistence is not foolishness. It is the most powerful force we have ever encountered. The shuttle's engines began to warm up. The delegation was ready to leave. What happened here will be recorded in our archives, said. Future species will study this project. They will learn what happens when they underestimate humans. Perhaps they will be wiser than we were. extended his hand, a human gesture of respect, hesitated, then reached out with one crystalline limb to touch his palm. The contact lasted only a moment, but something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or acknowledgement. The delegation returned to their shuttle, watched them lift off and disappear into the yellow sky. He was alone again on the surface of 4, but not for long. In one rotation, the colony ship would arrive. 500 people would begin their new lives in the building he had made with his hands and his sweat and his stubborn human will. He walked back to the habitation complex and ran his palm across the wall. The surface was smooth and solid. It would still be standing 100 years from now, long after he was gone. That was the point, really. That was what the aliens didn't understand. Humans didn't build for themselves. They built for the future. For children they would never meet and generations they would never see. They built despite every obstacle because giving up had never been an option. Allowed himself a small smile. Then he went inside to make final preparations for the colonists' arrival. On the orbital station, stood at her viewport and watched the planet turning slowly below her. Somewhere on that surface, lights would soon appear. A human settlement would grow. More humans would come, and they would build more structures, and they would teach others how to build, and the cycle would continue. She opened a new file in the consortium's archive system. Her crystalline fingers moved across the interface, entering data that would be reviewed by analysts and strategists and species representatives for years to come. Classification, existential assessment. Species human. Primary trait, persistence. Secondary trait, knowledge transfer. Threat level, pending indefinite observation. She paused, then added one final note. Recommendation, do not underestimate, do not obstruct, observe and adapt. Below her, on the surface of 4, the first lights of the human habitation complex flickered on. Inside was testing the electrical systems, making sure everything was ready. The colonists would arrive tomorrow. They would bring their families and their hopes and their dreams. They would learn how to maintain the building that had created. They would teach their children. Their children would teach others. And humans would keep building, just as they always had. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. Because someone had to do it. Because they had decided long ago that it would be them.